Hello and welcome back to another Giant Slayer TFT video. Today we'll be covering the top upcoming changes for set 4.5. This is the second video in a two-part series delving into what's being added and removed in set 4.5 and which of those changes will have the most impact on the meta. Since we've already covered what's being removed and changed, this video will be focused on the new champions and traits. Keep in mind that everything is subject to change during the testing period on the PBE, meaning nothing is fully set in stone just yet. With all that said, let's go ahead and dive on in. But before we begin, please don't forget to click the links in our description. Give your support to everyone who helped make this video happen. We host many TFT tournaments with plenty of exciting content to come, so be sure to also follow our Giant Slayer TFT social media pages. Alright, let's get back to the video, and to start off the top upcoming changes, let's focus on a few of the new synergies being added. The first synergy we'll be talking about is Dragon Soul. Dragon Soul comes in as a new vertical trait that is split into 3 tiers, going from 3 to 6 to 9. Because it goes all the way up to 9, that means they added a Dragon Soul spatula item to the game called the Spirit of the Dragon. Use a rod and a spatula to make the new item, which is replacing the previous Dusk spatula item. Dragon Soul is a unique trait in that the Dragon Soul champion that takes the first damage will receive a powerful buff until they die. The champion is buffed in various ways, including bonus stats like attack speed and spell power. In addition to that, they will do a Dragon Soul blast every 5 attacks that does a large amount of magic damage. Once the unit with the buff dies, it will then pass on to the closest nearby Dragon Soul ally. This is similar to how Darkstar originally functioned back in set 3, so it's interesting to see them add that mechanic back in. Overall, the buff that Dragon Soul provides is quite substantial and provides an interesting choice to the player on how they want to go about activating the initial buff. There's 7 total Dragon Soul champions, but the main one to talk about now is Swain. Swain is one of the replacement 5-cost champions, and his traits are Dragon Soul Siphoner. His ultimate transforms him similarly to how he functioned in set 1. Basically, he gains extra health and does magic damage to nearby enemies, including a burning effect that does true damage and applies healing reduction. Swain and Dragon Soul look to be a powerful combination for the late game. Whether or not Dragon Soul will have much application earlier on in the game, we'll have to see, but it's obvious that the trait was designed around the concept of Swain being in the front line, since he's almost guaranteed to be the first one attacked. Of course, we'll also have to wait and see how well Swain actually does as a 5-cost, but based on his kit alone, it's likely he'll become a staple of the meta. And since he'll be a core late game champion, that means Dragon Soul should have a presence in the meta, since the buff it provides is quite substantial. Let's move on to the next trait being added, Fabled. Fabled is a trait with only 3 champions, and you'll need all 3 to activate it, or at least one of them to be a chosen. Basically, what it does is empower the Fabled champion's abilities to do an additional effect. For example, Cho'Gath with Fabled will knock up the whole board, though damage won't apply to everything. As you can see from that example alone, Fabled will be an interesting synergy to play both with and against. One of the reasons why we have Fabled as a top upcoming change is that the additional effects it applies can be done for just 2 units if you have it chosen. That much value is hard to pass up, which likely means that going for a Fabled chosen just to throw it into your build could have a lot of value. That other reason is Cho'Gath himself. Cho'Gath is back again with the same ability he's had previously that knocks up enemies in an AoE and deals damage. Because he provides really good CC, it likely means he'll be a key frontline champion in set 4.5, even if you don't end up playing Fabled with him. But if you do play Fabled, you now have a champion that can CC literally the entire board. That's a ridiculously good ability and may end up even overshadowing champions like Sejuani and Aatrox. Definitely keep an eye out for Fabled and Cho'Gath being a top tier choice in the meta. And now let's move on to the last new synergy to talk about, Slayer. Slayer is the new trait meant for carries, similar to how Hunter was additional damage for carries. But instead of just a big burst of damage, Slayer champions will instead gain lifesteal and gain bonus damage based on the missing health of their target. The lifesteal they gain is also tied to health, but it's based on their own health, as the lifesteal increases the lower they are on health. There's 4 new champions being added with Slayer in addition to Zed and Pyke, bringing the total number to 6. So what makes Slayer a top upcoming trait? Mainly that it focuses so heavily on increasing the carry potential of the champions with the tag. They've added Tryndamere, Olaf, and Samira as carries, plus you already have Zed. Having Slayer should open up the door for multiple damage dealers in a comp, or at the very least, you can buff 1 carry if you find a chosen Slayer. We'll talk about Samira later because, believe us, she deserves her own spotlight. But for now, we're going to focus on a different Slayer, Tryndamere. Tryndamere, for anyone unfamiliar with League, is a pretty darn good melee champion. Luckily, it doesn't look like he's getting the Undying Rage ultimate, but instead he will spin towards the largest pack of enemies, dealing damage and then additional damage on his next 3 attacks. Looking at that ability with the addition of Slayer, it does seem like Tryndamere should be a top melee carry in set 4.5. Of course, he will be competing with Olaf for that role, but depending on how much damage Tryndamere can do, he may end up being a scary champion to deal with. Okay, let's move away from new traits and instead focus on specific champions, starting with Sivir. Sivir is coming in as a pseudo replacement for both Jinx and Jhin, since she's a 3-cost sharpshooter that does okay damage. The huge thing about Sivir, and why we consider her a top upcoming addition to the game, is that her ability buffs your whole team. This buff increases the attack speed of her allies, and she also gains an additional attack damage for the duration. Now, we can probably talk about how this ability likely will be balanced not to buff every single champion on your board, but that aside, an attack speed stim is always really strong. Look at when Spirit was broken as heck. Even the reworked Warwick was ridiculously good after they made his ability give attack speed to some allies. Whether or not Simmer is going to do okay damage or not, the fact is, having that impactful of a buff makes her worth considering in practically any comp. We've already mentioned him, but let's take a more in-depth look at Olaf. Olaf is both a Slayer and a Dragon Soul, so his potential damage output is quite high, assuming you're playing both traits and the Dragon Soul buff ends up going on him. Because not only will those traits buff him, his ability will as well, with increased attack speed, immunity to crowd control, and adding a cleave to his auto attacks. For anyone that remembers Olaf in set 2, he was a really strong carry, and with the same ultimate that he had back then, it's likely that he's still going to be a really strong carry. Definitely look to try out Olaf, whether with Slayer, Dragon Soul, or both, as a potential carry in set 4.5. It's time now to talk about the new mage carry, Aurelion Sol. He's also a Dragon Soul, but we're going to set that aside for now and focus on what he brings to the table as a mage. It's no secret that mages had a rough time in set 4, with only a few times where it had much use at all, and even then the main carry for the trait, Ahri, never really needed it to do well. What Aurelion Sol brings is hopefully increased value to the mage trait, along with the proper counterplay to his damage output. By that we mean since he always targets the furthest enemy away, you can position around that and lessen the impact that his ability has. This is great because it means the mage player has value, since the player with Aurelion Sol wants him to cast a second time right away, and it's great because players can actually position around that damage. Whether or not he ends up being a strong carry, or even overpowered, it's good that they've added a champion that players can actually position around and outplay. The next two champions to talk about are the range 4-cost carries, starting with Xayah. Xayah is an Elderwood, Executioner, and Keeper champion. Basically, she's the new Warwick, although not quite in the same way. But the really interesting thing about Xayah is how defensive her kit is while still being a carry. Elderwood, we already know, provides a lot of defensive stats, but with both Xayah and Rakan being Elderwood Keeper, you now have a really easy way of playing both traits together. It's going to be interesting to see how they balance the damage Xayah does with the defensive nature of her traits and ability. The other new range 4-cost carry is Kayle. Kayle comes in as a Divine Executioner, but the important thing here is her Divine tag. Divine always lacked a proper range carry and mainly relied on Warwick as the primary carry, but Kayle now fills that role. For anyone that remembers how good she was in set 3, it's likely we're going to see a similar thing happen in 4.5, where Kayle is a pivotal champion in the meta. Between Xayah and Kayle, it looks like there's going to be a lot of ways that you can go about playing range carries in 4.5. We've mainly covered 4-cost champions so far, which often have a huge role in the meta, but now let's shift over to the new 5-cost champions, starting with Samira. Samira is a range damage dealer with Slayer, Sharpshooter, and Daredevil as her tags. Slayer, as we've talked about already, is potentially going to be really good for carry champions. Sharpshooter is interesting for Samira since it adds a late game element to the trait. But the important trait to focus on here is the unique one for her, Daredevil. Daredevil will make it so Samira will gain a shield every other attack and makes her next attack fire 2 shots. This also causes her to gain style, which, at max rank, will allow her to cast her ability. This ability causes her to dash in, become unstoppable, and basically deal a ton of damage to nearby enemies. What's unique about Samira and Daredevil is that she won't have mana and instead relies on attacking to gain her style points. While her damage and all that can be balanced, the fact that she doesn't rely on mana makes her quite unique to TFT. Taking damage, for example, won't increase her mana, and any CC that prevents her from attacking will slow her down immensely. She's definitely one of the more interesting additions to the roster coming with 4.5. And the last champion we have to talk about is Ornn, or more specifically his trait, Blacksmith. Baseline, Ornn is a strong 5-cost champion. His ability has crowd control both as a stun and as an attack speed slow, and he does well as a frontline champion since he's a Vanguard. But really the big thing about Ornn is his Blacksmith trait, as this allows him to craft unique items. After Ornus participated in combat, he begins forging an artifact item. The amount of rounds it takes to complete depends on his star level, but when it is complete, you'll gain a new item to give to a champion, though each champion can only use one artifact. These items, well, a lot of them sound really, really good. Of course, the specifics are going to change over the course of the PBE, and there's going to be plenty of balance, but unique items that you don't have control over, which you're going to get, are going to be potentially bad for the game. The reason being is that it adds even more layers of RNG to the game. Of course, this is only speculation, and perhaps balance will fix up any worries, but artifact items could very well shift the late game of TFT in a gigantic way. That is going to be it for today's video, folks. As mentioned, this video is part 2 of the 2-part series delving into the top upcoming changes for Set 4.5. Keep in mind that we've only talked about a portion of what's being changed in Set 4.5, so we recommend going onto the PBE and trying things out for yourself. Let us know in the comment section below what change you're looking forward to most in Set 4.5. Thank you for watching, and if you're enjoying our content, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for future Giant Slayer TFT videos.